So one of my fondest memories growing up is of my dad sitting at our coffee table with the 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzles. You know, one of those really complicated ones. He would say, first you have to take the time to group the pieces. Then you have to build out the outer edges. And then you have to fill in the middle by finding the light patterns in the puzzle pieces. He would say it takes time, it takes patience, it takes commitment, and please, please do not lose any of the puzzles. See, addressing complex social change is like a complicated puzzle. It's messy, it's daunting, and it can be scary. It's my hope today to inspire you to address complex social change by asking the question, what if? Having worked in the field of philanthropy for close to 2 decades, I have grappled with how do you address complex social issues and design a philanthropic system that's inclusive, equitable, and able to share power. And I'm talking about a system that's counterculture to how traditional philanthropy often operates, where the process begins with a call for proposals around a specific issue or an initiative and ends with an announcement about the latest organizations that have been funded, revealing a system that's often complicated, often hard to navigate, risk-averse with limited transparency. I believe that in order for the field of philanthropy to intentionally and effectively address complex social change, that it must be willing to build a new puzzle. And I'm talking about a puzzle that allows for innovation, the centering of people and communities, and is able to share and build power. I'm excited to share that CoThink is that new puzzle, and it's our vision of a philanthropy that's for everyone and has the power to address complex social issues. See, I remember traveling home to do site visits and being excited about all of the individuals and organizations that were doing their work around racial equity. And I remember being amazed at how many efforts that were bubbling up in Asheville and the surrounding regions that were being led by African American and Latinx leaders, all in service to a progressive agenda to address the issues unique to their communities. And I also noticed that many of these efforts were under-resourced, and many of these efforts lacked visibility and were working in silos. I knew in my role I could only make recommendations for a small number of these efforts due to our funding priority areas. And the community foundation priority areas were not well aligned either. See, there was a mixed match. So CoThink was birthed out of witnessing a new level of community readiness, identifying a challenge, and asking a how can and what if question. How can we collectively create supportive networks that can accelerate change to address some of the most vexing issues facing our communities? And what if we leaned into the proposition that African American and Latinx leaders working through a shared leadership platform that's grounded in explicit values of trust and authentic relationships could be philanthropists and could be game changers shifting the field of philanthropy. CoThink harnesses the collective time, talent, and treasure of African American and Latinx leaders and allies in Asheville and Western North Carolina to build a robust ecosystem for change. And I'm talking about an ecosystem that includes new infrastructure for media, to those that are focused on efforts around cultural competency and women's health, to those that are addressing the education economic gap and addressing next generational leadership. We do our work through strategic investments in the key pillars of a thriving community: education, economic opportunity, leadership development, and health. We build robust networks that are working in a very intersectional way across race, gender, geographic, and generational lines with an explicit values around trust and authentic relationships. And we build safe and non-judgmental spaces for civic discourse. Through our motto, we're challenging the very idea of how do you address complex social change by asking a set of critical questions. Who is a philanthropist? How to engage those individuals and communities that are most impacted to design, lead, and prioritize philanthropic initiatives that are innovative, unapologetically bold, and are able to take risks? And what are the explicit commitments that we're willing to make to ensure that philanthropic vehicles are grounded in the principles of social change philanthropy from the beginning and are centering people and are sharing and building power? See, addressing complex social change is challenging, and it creates space for innovation. And as we ask these questions, I can't help but to hear my dad. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes commitment. It takes new muscles to do it differently. And it takes new puzzle pieces. What makes CoThink unique are the puzzle pieces that we use to build our puzzle. See, we start with community, which is the strong frame and the edges of our puzzle. This is the foundation for the entire puzzle, and it sets the direction and ultimate impact. I remember our first meeting with African American and Latinx leaders. Everyone was all on edge, and there was a lot of uncertainty. But everyone showed up, and they brought dishes from their native culture. Many of our members were using the interpretation equipment for the very first time. They were fish out of water. But we broke bread together, and we shared our experiences of being Black and brown together in Western North Carolina. We talked about the commonalities in our stories, and we wept together. And we signed a public covenant outlining all the ways that we would be in community and relationship with one another as we move forward. So you have to understand, we had to see each other. We had to trust each other. The next leg of building our puzzle is we built the inner part of our puzzle to building a collaborative culture. I remember our first year of planning. Yes, we took a whole year. We would meet at the chamber, and we would pack into one of those classrooms on the second floor, and we would unroll our tattered flip chart paper where we had scribed every vision, every desire, every dream that we wanted for our community. We would wordsmith, we would reflect, we'd be explicit about our values, and we'd look at the definition behind every word. See, in this patient and intentional process, we were able to build a culture that's steeped in trust, consensus building, addressing systemic issues, and embracing process as a critical part of strategy. Finally, we find ourselves at the meat of the puzzle, the center of the puzzle, which represents our commitments and our non-negotiables that run through all of our work: healing, access to resources, capacity building, and systems change. And although all of our commitments are important, I'm just going to focus on our foundational ones. In our commitments, healing is an important part of our work that's ongoing. It requires intentional space and dialogue to support vulnerability, grieving, and working in the gray. When a young man from our community, who many of us knew, was violently killed in a police traffic stop, we created space. We performed ceremony using water, and we wept together. We have a saying in CoThink: if you haven't wept at a CoThink meeting, then you haven't fully been oriented. Lastly, I want to talk about our commitment to access to resources, which is all about prioritizing grassroots leaders of color and connecting them with resources through easy entry points and demystifying the grant-making process. I recall our first grants process. See, we were all on edge. We had publicly committed to give $4,000 out to community. Now, I know that doesn't seem like a lot to many of you, but for us, it was a lot. But we didn't want to duplicate any practices that did not honor our model. And I remember Sekou Coleman saying, "Let's use a video application." So we huddled together, we took a deep breath, and we performed our first video application training. And we built out an easy-to-use platform. Community, collaboration, commitment. I'm excited to share with you that these three puzzle pieces are working. The CoThink model is creating little ripples in our community that is showing up as big waves and transforming our communities in a tremendous way. And let me share with you some of those accomplishments. In our efforts to build community, we acknowledge that community building is hard and it creates discomfort. And we've created a saying in CoThink: when things get uncomfortable, don't leave, lean in, and just eat a cookie. But in that discomfort, we've been able to cultivate some of the most rich, relationships that are more aligned, coordinated, and collaborative towards greater giving and greater impact. We've been able to have hard conversations about complicity, immigration, and the over-policing of communities of color. We've been able to create space for healing, promote solidarity, and move from a place of I to a place of we. In our efforts to build a collaborative culture, we've been able to see new ideas created by African American and Latinx leaders through our Micro Innovation Fund. We've been able to do peer-to-peer coaching with our members and arm them with new skills and resources and support them into moving into important leadership positions in our communities. And we've been able to build robust partnerships that are working together to leverage impact. Lastly, in our commitments, I really want to focus on access to resources, which is all about removing barriers and leveraging greater impact. See, when we announced our first grantees, one of our members was among that list. She was amazed, she was shocked. You have to understand, this was a person who had committed her life to our community, to our children, to the education system here. And she had never received a grant. What was most exciting wasn't just the grant, it's what she did with it. Over the course of 12 months, she turned that $1,000 into $150,000. See, what we know is when we remove barriers, we create a different type of partnership with our grantee partners, and we shift their relationship to money and philanthropy. Over the course of the last 3 years, we've been able to give over $70,000 from grassroots leaders to grassroots leaders in our communities, and we'll give additional $36,000 away next month. We know when leaders are able to access a Co-Think grant, that they're able to leverage that into additional resources and leverage that into additional social capital and leadership opportunities. And we know that more leaders of color are getting grants and getting resources through more traditional philanthropic avenues because of our relationships and through our Co-Think breakdown tool. So the reality is that puzzle building is hard, it's messy, it's daunting, and it's scary. It's my hope as we all work to address complex social change in our community that I can leave you with a couple of final words. The Co-Think model and the models like it need to be scaled, but not scaled in a way where it's co-opted by philanthropy, but is invested in very deeply as a tool and as a partner through grants, through investments, and the transference of philanthropic assets directly to these organizations. So as we all work to address complex social change, let's remember my dad's advice. Let's first take the time to group the pieces. Then let's build out our outer edges. And let's fill in the middle by finding the like patterns in the puzzle pieces. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes commitment, and I'll add, it takes courage. And please, please include all of the critical pieces. Thank you.